Hello, everyone. My name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today, I am sorry to report that once again, I have some bad news. And it really seems like this has been happening a lot lately, hasn't it? Like, way more than the entire previous almost 10 years of my channel. But I really do feel like this is important to talk about because it potentially impacts one of the most treasured things in our community: our ability to buy new toys. And if you have watched my channel for a while, you have likely heard me recommend a website named Etsy as my go-to place to find unique, handcrafted kink gear of all kinds. But it seems that Etsy may not be my go-to place for very much longer, and there's a big reason why. So at the very end of June, on June 27th, Etsy quietly announced a sweeping policy update focused on so-called mature content. Alice Wu Paulus, the VP of Trust and Safety at Etsy, highlighted 3 key changes within this policy update in a blog post, including the following, quote, significantly limiting the types of adult toys and sexual accessories that can be sold on Etsy, prohibiting items that depict sex acts and genitalia, and introducing stricter criteria for listing images that feature mature content. And initially, on a surface level, I think these are changes the average user can understand. Etsy is to a certain extent a public platform, and you don't need an account to browse listings, which means you don't need to verify your age, which means any kid on the internet can see what is put onto Etsy. So it makes sense that they may not want people to see genitalia without warning when searching for, say, a bridal shower gift. But as usual, the devil here is in the details. For example, which types of adult toys or sexual accessories are being banned from the website? What counts as depicting genitalia? Will custom lingerie makers be hit as well as furry artists or purveyors of anime waifu pillows? Alice's blog post states that no photorealistic depictions of sex acts or genitals will be allowed, even with warnings about mature content or obscured listing photos, which has more or less been the standard. Not everyone has done it, but a lot of people who make adult content on Etsy will obscure their listing photos from the public view in search results. Adult nudity, but not genitals or sex acts specifically, is allowed in other non-photorealistic mediums. So what does that mean for everyone's favorite nude torso wax play candles? Well, knowing the answer to that will require diving into which types of adult toys are being removed from the website entirely. And these new guidelines are extensive. So what I'm going to be doing here is just highlighting what I consider to be the most relevant pieces for what we're talking about, especially what I think may impact the kink community and the kinds of things kinky folk like to browse for on Etsy. So first of all, in section 2, Etsy states they are banning the sale of all adult toys that are inserted into the body, applied to the genitalia, or designed for genitals to be inserted into them. This includes adult toys such as dildos, vibrators, anal plugs, sex dolls, and fleshlights. But in this same section, section 2, they also state that they are permitting the continued sale of other non-insertable adult toys like restraints, handcuffs, nipple clamps, body harnesses, sex furniture, and BDSM accessories, provided they are listed appropriately, whatever that means. And we'll talk about what they are likely getting at with that a little bit later. But instantly, I can see some potential problems with this. Is, say, a strap-on harness allowed since it facilitates penetration even though it's not used for penetration by itself? What about something like a gag? Those are technically inserted into the body, often in a very sexual way, but those aren't usually in the shape of a genital. What about other pieces of BDSM furniture which facilitate penetration, like queening stools or sex swings? What about lube? I mean, that's also applied to the genitals. Is that going to be banned as well? Not that I would necessarily recommend buying homemade lube from Etsy, but some people do. And hey, where is the line between an assistive device and a sex toy? What will this mean for things like dilator sets, which, in my opinion, should be considered medical devices and not mere adult toys? Considering this is far from the first rollout of a policy like this, we know from experience that new rules like this will often unfairly target many otherwise well-meaning companies that the average person thinks are well within the new rules. And if that does happen, when that does happen, what recourse will those companies have should their listings get removed or their shop be banned incorrectly? From what I can tell, there's no provision for this whatsoever. And also, to be honest, I can't ignore the fact that this change delightfully came at the very tail end of Pride Month, and I do believe it will likely disproportionately impact queer people and queer makers of various things on Etsy. While folk of all genders and sexual orientations do use sex toys, Etsy, in my perspective, is something of a haven for those who don't have their needs met by mainstream toy companies. When you're living in rural New Brunswick or South Dakota, it's going to be a lot harder for you to be able to track down a queer-friendly, feminist sex toy store that you can shop at in person without anyone else interfering in it. Especially back in Etsy's heyday, it was one of the few places where you could go to get body-safe, high-quality silicone toys at a reasonable price. Oftentimes, your only other options were from luxury toy brands, and they were selling devices for $100, $200, sometimes more. Or your other option, if you didn't have that much money, was to go for an extremely questionable rubber or jelly toy. It's not even just the toys either. I'm already hearing from some trans folks that these changes are making it impossible to find gender-affirming devices like packers and breast forms, which, again, is evidence this is going to directly impact, in possibly an out-of-scope way, members of the queer community and trans people. And at this point, especially because of what I focused on and what I've talked about, you might be thinking, well, but my kink isn't sexual. Why should I care if they're banning dildos and anal plugs? That's not my thing. Why do I care? And hey, you know what? I get it. I am not exactly the biggest purchaser of those kinds of toys for myself, but there are two things that I think we should all keep in mind. One is basically what I just talked about, which are all of the things likely to get caught in the crossfire, like ball gags or chastity devices. You might care if those things suddenly get taken off the market. And two is, even if they aren't banning kink yet, or kink toys yet, they are moving that line closer and closer, and that by itself should be worrying. Now, it is just going to be a lot easier for them to update things again, to have new guidelines again in a month or a year or 5 years, and then also ban kinky toys too. And there's a few other rule changes I haven't talked about yet that I think indicate this could potentially be on the horizon, depending on how things play out. In the third section of the policy, they have specific rules against, quote, sexual language referencing familial relationships, which is something I have never heard before on any website. And it says that we define sexual language to include references to sex acts, sexual bodily fluids, fettuccine acts, including BDSM acts such as spanking, genitalia, arousal, and terminology such as or. We define references to familiar relationships as terms that refer to parents, step-parents, children, stepchildren, siblings, step-siblings, grandparents, aunts or uncles, and nieces or nephews. Etsy does not allow items bearing sexual language or slogans that contain references to familial relationships. This includes slogans such as daddies or choke me mommy. So that is right. You have heard that correctly. All of you step on me mommy people just got personally called out by Etsy's content guidelines. And I mean, it's kind of funny. I think we can all look at that and maybe laugh a little bit, but really, it's not that funny because I imagine these guidelines are in place because they are maybe technically related to the illegal act of incest, even though obviously in the kink community we're not talking about real incest at all on any level. And I also want to highlight that this indicates they view BDSM acts as sexual acts and also as fettuccine acts, which not all of kink is about pasta stuff, but okay. I have to pick and choose my battles here, so we're not going to argue with Etsy about that one. So I am now wondering if things like Dommy Mommy are going to be allowed, but I imagine they're probably not going to be. And I have to be frank, is this giving anyone else a children being sold through covert listings on Wayfair conspiracy theory vibe? Because, like, selling these items is wrong because they somehow fuel a real world illegal activity is what I'm kind of getting from this. And is there any evidence at all of a correlation between these two things? Did the FBI bust somebody who is using these shirts and CSA material? I mean, I don't see all of the news, but I don't think so. And meanwhile, I doubt Etsy would do anything about a markedly more harmful slogan like, just pray the gay away, which I know because they have almost 1,000 search results for that phrase alone. But who cares about homophobic hate speech when you have consensual adult relationships to police instead? Am I right? I mean, I don't know what Etsy is thinking with this one. I don't know who put their feet to the fire on this, if anyone did, or if the VP came up with it. I would love to know how all of this came about. But beyond that, I think this specific new guideline is important to keep in mind when we are looking at other things Etsy is concerned about promoting. They also prohibit, in Section 1, illegal sexual acts, including bestiality, necrophilia, incest, and non-consensual sex. I believe their third section is an extension of this banning incest guideline. So if a Yes Daddy shirt counts as promoting something illegal, where's the line between furry fan art and bestiality, or pet play and bestiality, or CNC and non-consensual sex? We might be able to spot the difference, but can Etsy? And I'm not saying Etsy shouldn't do anything to mitigate the propagation of illegal acts on their website, but their guidelines are vague enough that people doing perfectly legal things with other adults could get into trouble. And that's concerning, particularly because this provides an easy stepping stone to later explicitly ban furry stuff, brony stuff, pet play gear, or romance novels, assuming those things don't get removed by the new updated guidelines as they are. All of this is made worse by the fact that sellers are only given a month until the end of July to comply with those new guidelines. For those who are facing being barred from selling on the site entirely, that means only having a few weeks to build a website and migrate as many customers as possible to a new platform. And for those looking to write it out on Etsy, this does not give them much time to create new mockups, edit listings, and censor or remove what they need to. I've not mentioned this yet, but one of the criteria for borderline items like harnesses or collars is that the listing photos cannot include real people, mannequins, or flat lay photography only. Some creators have dozens, if not hundreds, listing photos that they've crafted with models and product photographers that they may have spent quite a lot of money on that they now have to scrap. The way these new rules are being implemented means a lot of makers, many of whom do not have the setup to do quality product photography themselves, are going to be up a creek without a paddle. All of these facts put together have made adult Etsy sellers upset and worried for the future. To quote one interviewed by Modern Retail, "If those same buyers from Etsy don't find us on our site or elsewhere, it's going to be catastrophic," said Stevenson. "How do we afford payroll when in 30 days, we lose most of our revenue? This potentially life-changing policy update isn't even being properly announced to sellers." Reportedly, sellers only got news of this update through being able to see the blog post or by reading about it on social media. They were sometimes the last to find out. No emails, no notifications, no pop-ups in their sellers' background tools, nothing. It's almost like Etsy wants sellers to be taken by surprise when their storefront gets removed from the platform or their items get taken down. Like, say what you will about Patreon or YouTube. As a creator on both of those websites, I can say when something changes, I always get an email and I get a pop-up in my back end if it's like a really big thing, and they make sure that their creators see that stuff, at least if it's something big. They do sometimes slip in new updates kind of like on the sly, but it's not that common. They at least meet the bare minimum of what a website is supposed to do most of the time. I know what it's like to deal with the threat of censorship, always breathing down your neck, never knowing if you're going to wake up to an email one day that says, your account has been terminated due to repeated community guidelines violations because that day someone decided to interpret a line in a rule differently all of a sudden. And even on a milder, more day-to-day level, there are things like the seemingly random experience of being copyright claimed or censored or demonetized. I mean, heck, with this video, how many times I've had to say things like bestiality or genitalia. I expect that even though this is going to be a newsworthy story, I will be demonetized or age restricted because of the words I'm using, even though they are literally in a policy update for a website. There is no context that seemingly matters there. But not really to talk too much about YouTube. The point is that I have complete empathy for the sellers who are impacted by this change because it's not really too different from either stuff I have personally experienced or things I fear experiencing and literally have nightmares about as a creative person myself. And I wish I could tell you that Etsy was an otherwise great company. This is like the first time they're doing something like this, and so we can have some faith in them to do it correctly, but we can't really give them the benefit of the doubt. It's just not the case. Whether you're a seller or a buyer on Etsy, you know that the quality of the site has gone down the tubes for like the last decade, it seems like. There was the invasion of copycat stores and resellers pretending to be artisans and stealing photos. Then there were all the mass-produced garbage, like identical t-shirts with the same mock-up and the same trite phrase, just flooding everything from a dozen different sellers that maybe aren't really all that different. Like all of the Pray the Gay Away t-shirts for women and babies. Then there was all the drop shipping, and that made everything so much worse. And, I guess we can thank alpha male doms for that one because they were the ones telling everyone in a $3,000 course that they could get rich from drop shipping on Etsy and Amazon and all of that. And more recently, Gen AI has been taking over the site as well. I noticed personally a lot of that when I was shopping around for stream assets earlier this year on Etsy. It went from being a cool online market where you could basically virtually go to a maker's event with handmade goods, and now it's become a bad Amazon knockoff with an even worse theft problem. It has actually started to feel more like the website has 7 real creators on it and then about 7,000 bots copying their work, stealing their photos, and trying to trick potential buyers into going to their listing first. It almost seems like a pay-to-win scheme, if I'm being honest. And allowing all of this to propagate on the platform was profitable for Etsy. To a point. During the pandemic, the website exploded in popularity, only to fall after lockdowns ended. I'm sure, at least in part, this was because the quality of what you can find on search results just totally plummeted on the website, despite the alleged efforts Etsy has made recently to curb that issue. But, to be honest, if I wanted something from Temu, I would just go to Temu, right? And Etsy hasn't exactly done anything to make sellers want to stay around and fight against the tide of spam. Almost everyone I know who sells something on Etsy, adult or otherwise, complains about the lack of meaningful support and the ever-increasing sellers' fees that either force them to take a pay cut or to take the blame when they have to pass the cost on to their customers. A lot of people have issues with fake negative reviews or people trying to scam them out of damaged packages and getting items for free, and there's just no help for any of that seemingly for most people. So you'd think that some marketing bigwig who's making approximately $55 gajillion a year would look at all of this and go, looks like we need to focus more on this spam problem so we get more completed transactions and make sellers happy with us again so they don't move to a different website. But nah, instead, the real problem we need to combat with force are the people who make toys for adults. Maybe Etsy should have contacted Tumblr's former execs and asked them how banning adult content impacted their bottom line. And I truly hate that I have to think this, but all of this makes me wonder how much of this can be explained by a corporation just thinking about its bottom line and nothing else. Is it just the bog standard motivation of greed, or is something more sinister going on here? The impact of laws like Sesta Fosta cannot be overstated, and this is far from a one-off occurrence. Etsy is not the first place this has happened to. I just mentioned Tumblr, and I think now, looking back on it, they were a little bit of a canary in the coal mine for what was to come after they started automatically removing adult content from the platform years ago. Although, from what I've read, they've recently brought it back, so small win really feels like a drop in the middle of a very angry ocean. Facebook and Instagram have increasingly cracked down on adult content creators to the point where now I know people who run in-person sex toy stores and educational events, and they can scarcely use either site because every post gets the algorithm upset and gets just automatically flagged. OnlyFans also famously tried to remove adult content creators after it thought it had outgrown them in 2021, only to then immediately reverse the decision. Twitter is in some ways I hate to say this, the last bastion of adult content on the internet, maybe besides Reddit, but even that isn't a given. Twitter loves to censor anything that it sees as adult in nature, so posts and photos are frequently restricted. And I know many large creators, from very famous pro-doms and performers, who have credibly accused the site of shadow banning them because they have 250,000 followers and 10 people will see a post. And even on sites where adult content is allowed, more and more restrictions are being put into place. Most, if not all, have implemented ID verification requirements that could easily compromise a creator's details. Many more have strange ways of seemingly attempting to follow the law, like Patreon's recent changes requiring even fictional drawn characters to clearly establish consent before any acts take place in a piece of media. While none of these individually are the end of the world, it's starting to feel like a death by 1,000 cuts. Like, less content there, more restrictions over there, more censorship over here, and suddenly there's nowhere online where you can have a frank conversation about sex or relationships or adult issues. And there's no website you can tell people to go where they can find good information, to be able to make good social connections, or even to find good quality toys to play with. The finger in this situation is usually pointed at credit card processing companies. You may know about this from way back in the day on FetLife. They had a huge issue with a couple of credit card processors coming down on them, but it has increasingly been something that has come up. For example, with OnlyFans, they blamed credit card processors for their changes. But the processing companies, in turn, blame a nebulous group of concerned citizens and lobbying groups. Though with public knowledge of Project 2025 growing, you might be able to guess the sort of people that are advocating for this yourself. The kinds of puritanical religious conservatives who don't think anyone, even adults, who don't share their beliefs, should be allowed to do anything that they regard as immoral. Online, in real life, in fantasy, or in the privacy of their own homes, to be frank. And that, to me at least, is very, very scary. And oh, wouldn't you know it, right before I was about to start filming this, I saw yet another update on Etsy, and oh boy, this is a change that the esteemed lingerie and textile expert Cora Harrington referred to as asinine on Twitter, and I agree with that statement. So, at the same time they are cracking down on all of the bad, dirty adult stuff on Etsy, they are also scrapping the vintage and handmade labels you can use to filter search results on the site. This is, as far as I'm concerned, the potential death blow to this website. The only thing that has made this site usable for years was the fact that you could get rid of a good chunk of the worst spam by opting just for vintage listings, for example. And now their replacement term, handpicked by, makes it so much easier to pass off mass-produced slop as genuine vintage clothing. Man, Etsy, they really are trying to Tumblr themselves, aren't they? Like, who is in charge over there? Is there crossover? What is happening? Did no one learn a lesson? Because at the same time as all this as well, they are also apparently doubling down on allowing AI content, so fantastic stuff. But I don't want to end this video on a sour note. I think the main lesson I want people to take away from this is that nothing lasts for forever. If you can, when you can, support artists that you like. And that doesn't just mean buying their stuff. You can share it. You can follow their other social media accounts. You can sign up for their email list. You can recommend them to other people. You can talk to them about coming to vend at an event near you. You can recommend them to conventions. And if you do buy something, check to see if they have their own website outside of Etsy. It'll likely be a good deal for you with less fees, and it'll also keep more money in the creator's pocket. So it's really a win-win. Etsy is kind of just a middleman. They don't really offer any additional value. So what I'd like to do right now is to share some of my favorite creators from Etsy who I think could be impacted by these policy changes. So let's talk about some of them. My favorite undiscovered gem is from Germany, and it's a store called SelfDelve, and they make these super cute, beautiful, artisanal, hand-painted gags, and the quality and the feel of these are just top-notch. BLL from California makes some of the best harnesses in the kink business, no contest. The leather is super, super soft and everything is very thoughtfully designed. If you see them in person at a convention, they can even do custom size adjustments as well, which is a great feature. Miss Rose is the premier paddle maker in the kink community. She makes paddles from unique woods you will not find anywhere else, and the finishing is perfect. She really knows what she's doing. If you want a wooden paddle, go to Miss Rose. I literally do not buy them from anywhere else. DiscerningSpecialist is a local maker here in Portland who makes gags, cuffs, collars, and more, and they have a very high-luxe design aesthetic. It's all extremely well done. Almost all of their items now come in biothane, which is fantastic for vegans, or if you just like things that you can get wet and messy. And speaking of biothane, I cannot go without recommending the TheKittenCollection. They have been around just about as long as I've been, possibly longer, and they make fantastic vegan-friendly gear for pet players and kinksters of all kinds. Definitely check them out. Longtime viewers of the channel may remember years ago when I reviewed a toy by a brand called Uberrime, and I still recommend them. If you like like bad dragon-esque toys but don't like the price tag, definitely give Uberrime a look. And finally, I have to recommend LVXsupply. Their short aluminum cane is one of my all-time favorite Thuddy Impact Play toys. I cannot recommend it enough for people that like Thuddy Impact Play. They are one of the few brands making gear that I would not only describe as beautiful, but artistic. They are very good at what they do. They have some very unique things, and it is a little spendy, but I think it is worth the money. And those are some of my favorite brands. I would love it if you all could tell me some of your favorite brands in a comment down below. Don't leave a link, because if you leave a link, YouTube will think it's spam, but just put the name or a social media handle. Do something like that, okay? And there you go. You maybe go window shopping in the comments down below. And I would love to know what you think about this one in a comment down below, just in general. I know I have been covering more intense topics recently, but I feel obligated to, because, like, how many other people on YouTube are going to talk about Etsy, like, banning dildos? Like, probably me and, like, 2 other people. Like, it's kind of a small club. So I want to make sure everyone knows what is going on so we can get out there and support our lovely makers in our community. And yeah, if you would like to already, please do subscribe, because I make videos twice a week about all different kink and BDSM related subjects. And finally, if you want to support what I do, the best way to do that is with Patreon. A link to that will be down below. If you do already support me there, thank you so much. It means the absolute world to me. And until I see you all next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.